Okay, let's take a look at where we left off last time. We have our Space Invaders thing come in, I click start, we have our countdown timer, and then our game begins. Let's go ahead and script the shooting and the movement of our tank. Before we do that, let's do a little housekeeping. I don't want these on the game panel. I want them to eventually be on their own thing. I just use it as sort of an example of how to fire it off. The reason for that is if I move this, notice that my tanks start to slide. And these are 3D objects that we'd have to do some fix stuff. So what I want to do is just drag them off. So you can see here's our game panel. I'm just going to drag them off down here. And then what I want to do is contain all of my assets. So let me just shrink that down so you can see it a little bit better. In an empty game object, I'm just going to call this level. And really what this is going to contain is all of the level data. So I'll put the canvas there and all the other stuff as well. And then within this level, well, actually, you know what? We have the Space Invaders level up here. We'll keep it separate, but at least now I can turn this off. And you can see here, let's go ahead and go back to 16 by 9. You can see this, we have our game here and all that stuff. Now, let's go back into our canvas for a second. These are all going to get shut off anyway, and let's just turn these off. And what I want to do is activate this level when I click that start button. So let's go ahead and press play just to see how this works. If you remember, the welcome panel comes on, and underneath that we have this start button, and below here we have an on-click game mode. So let's go ahead and turn on our welcome panel and turn on our level. And under our welcome panel, select your button here and hit the plus sign and drag your level into here. And then under no function, go to game object. And if you remember before, we have this set active Boolean that we used up here. And right now, I'm going to check it on because I want to check this off. And then when our game starts, I want to click start and it'll activate our level. Now, what I could do, and I'll probably do later, is I'll script it so that after our timer gets down to 3, 2, 1, then our actual tanks will appear. But for now, let's just kind of go with that as an easy solution. Just so that we can kind of keep the flow going. Otherwise, we can really get into the sticks of adding more and more functionality. And I really want to start a new game like Asteroids or something next. Okay, so let's turn on our level. And you're going to have to remember to shut that off when you start your game. And let's also turn off our welcome panel. These get automatically turned off through code if you remember. Now for our enemy tank, let's go ahead and in our scripts folder, create an SL player controller. All right. I'm going to try to pause as much as I can just to kind of shrink these videos down. But overall, here we have our SL player controller. Do not forget to grab this onto our player tank. So here's our script. Something else I think just to notice, I like these being weird and 3D looking here, but if you want to, you can go to main camera here and change it from perspective to orthographic. And that'll give us a flat view. And I'm assuming many of you might like that better, and we still have some of the shading here from the lights, so you can still differentiate that there's a 3D look there. So it's up to you if you want to leave it orthographic. I guess for the sake of the tutorial, I'll go ahead and leave it as orthographic. You can see it gives it more of that 2D feel, but I kind of like the 3D look. All right, so there's our player tank. Let's go ahead and double click this script either here to open it, or you can open it down here. Now, whenever I kind of do this stuff, I sort of like think it out before I write it. So I know I'm going to need some variables. And because I'm condensing a lot of this stuff down to just sort of finish up this tutorial, I know I'm going to need, so let's do 3 comments. If you guys remember that, if I put 3 lines for a comment and I press enter, it'll keep commenting for me. Another thing we can do is do an asterisk. This is like a multi-line comment as well. You do the asterisk symbol and then a forward slash and then forward slash asterisk. And is it the other way around? Let me see. I don't use it that often. In Visual Studio, it's usually green. Let's see if this works. Yeah, this is a multi-line comment as well. You have to forgive me. I'm kind of I don't use it that often, so I'm getting rusty in that area. But anyway, so we want to define some variables. And let's go with just a regular approach, 2 comments, because we're going to break this up. So we need some properties or variables. We need the speed of the tank. We need, let's see, what else do we need? We need a speed. We're going to have a bullet, I believe, right? So we need access to that bullet prefab. And we need a spawn point where the bullet is going to shoots from. And then we need to control how fast the bullet shoots. Now, some of this stuff we would throw in its own script, and maybe we will write a bullet script anyway. And then we need some sort of this is more of a game design mechanic you'll see in a lot of shooters, but we need like a timer for when the next bullet is fired. So this is kind of a fun way of doing it. Like you could even have a reload timer with like a health bar. And as that goes down, then you could shoot like a cooldown timer. And maybe when we do the RPG game, like in 3 or 4 games from now, we'll do that. We'll build that in. But for now, let's go ahead and I'm going to pause the video and write all these variables. All right, so you can see here that I have the speed is just a float for speed. I have a game object that's a bulletproof pad. I have a transform bullet spawn point. The fire rate is here, which is how fast the bullet's going to fire. And then we have the next fire time. So right now I have it set to 0. We're going to update that in code. Let's go ahead and save this script and then return to Unity in hooks and create a bullet. All right, so the bullet prefab, the first thing I want to do is on my player tank, I'm going to right click and I'm going to create an empty object, game object, and I'm going to call this spawn point. And I'm just going to position this at the nozzle of my tank. And notice that it's a child of my player tank, so I'm going to hit F to focus here twice, so the F zooms in. And if you're having a hard time seeing it, you can actually turn on a tag, like a little dot, and that'll show you the spawn point, so maybe a red dot. And let's see. There's other options. You can select your own image, but I generally like to do stuff like that. So I can now see where that spawn point is. And let's also, in our prefabs here, let's grab our player tank and just drop it in here so we have it remembering where our scripts are. So whenever it starts to increase in complexity, I generally make it a prefab. Now let's take that bullet spawn point here and let's drag and drop it into our bullet spawn point. Now, if you have a hard time clicking between them, like you have a really sensitive mouse, you can lock this, and then if you click off, it'll always stay there. Sometimes, though, we forget, and we're like, why isn't this changing? You have to unlock it. So we have our spawn point. Now we just need the bullet prefab. So just outside here, I'm going to right-click 3D object, and I'm going to make a sphere. And I'm going to hit R. Oops. And I'm going to call this bullet. You can call it laser if you want. Lasers are kind of cool. I'm not a big fan of, I know we're making kind of a Space Invaders game, but I'm more interested in like fictional battle than real. I'm not a huge fan of war, but for this particular game, I'm going to make it kind of big just so we could see it, and it makes it a little bit easier. You can over time change the type of blaster and stuff. So anyway, here's our bullet. And for now, I'm not going to add any sort of rigid body or anything like colliders. And so I'm just going to grab this bullet and drop it inside the prefabs folder. And then I'm going to delete it from my scene. And I'm actually going to select my player tank here. I'm going to drag it from here into that bullet prefab slot. So anytime I go into here and I edit this bullet prefab, it'll automatically update the one that's in this slot. All right, so let's go and start scripting the player movement. So let's go back to our script editor. All right, in the short term, I'm not going to use the start method at all. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write out the code that's going to make my tank move left and right. So let me go ahead and pause the video. All right, so we made a variable called horizontal input. And if you recall from other tutorials, make sure to go back and take those, do those like the Pong one. We're just getting the input of our horizontal axis, which is our A and D key, or our left and right arrow. Now this line of code here is what actually moves our tank. So we're transform.translating. We're just moving our tank's translation period position. And if you remember before, here's transform, and the translate relates to the position here. And so we're translating it, and you can see this is a vector 3, and it has 3 parameters. I kind of just plugged in really just one, and that's why it's giving me this kind of this line here, but it'll still work. We're moving it to the right. The amount that we're pressing between -1 and 1 on the horizontal input times the speed that we added here. So this is what's going to control our speed. We can make it faster or slower. And over time, you can also play with the speed for, like you get a power up and it goes faster, times time.delta time. If you remember, this is sort of like military clock time, and that'll normalize the speed of our character. Now let's just add the very simple script of shooting. So I'm just going to type if, tap, tap. And what I want to do is I want to use the left mouse button. And just like horizontals map to the left and right arrow keys, this is mapped to the left mouse button. So I'm going to pause the video and go ahead and type that out. So this is a lot of fun, this next fire time variable here, and I'll tell you why in a second. So we're just checking if our fire button is being pressed. So if I left click it, remember update runs every frame, so it's always checking our movement. And the current time, that means the time of your clock, is greater than next fire time. So do you remember our next fire time was set to 0 right off the bat? Well, inside of this variable here, we're saying next fire time, which is set to 0, is equal to the current time plus fire rate. So you might be like, well, what was fire rate again? Well, fire rate here is 0.5. So if I increase this to 1 or 2 or 3, it's going to, if we do, think about the math. So if I make this like a 2, well, every time this runs, time sort of resets to 0. So if I push this and I click the button, next fire time equals 3 plus 0. So as long as the time is greater than 3, or if the time is greater than 3, that means like the time that we've waited since I clicked, because every time I'm clicking, I'm sort of resetting the time. Then we can actually shoot, or we can call this shoot variable here. And so inside of this if statement, we're setting the time to 3, so we're always resetting it. So let's take a look at what our shoot variable, I just kind of wrote the method here. You can also right click here, show context, and it's like extract method, and then it'll actually extract it for you, or you can right click here. I know there's a way of refactoring where it creates the method for you. Yeah, create local function method. But it shouldn't make it an update. That probably should give us an error. That's weird that it made it for us. But here, I'm going to undo that. We want to make we want to make a new method here. And we're just going to call it void shoot. That was weird that it made it locally inside of there. I guess maybe it isn't weird because I did local method. Anyway. So now if you remember from previous tutorials, all we do is we use our instantiation. And if we hover over this, it tells us what the parameters are, the 3 parameters of what the instantiation is. And it's kind of showing you these different examples. So like it says Unity game object, that's going to be our bullet. Transform position, that's going to be the spawn points position. And then Boolean or some sort of rotation. So we're looking to do actually a quaternion rotation. And what that means is I just want the bullet to face the direction it's being fired from. Let me go ahead and type that out. And I'm just really going to be grabbing stuff like this variable here, pasting it in here. And then here, I'll just go ahead and do it instead of pausing. It won't take that long. The spawn point, but we need to get the position of the spawn point. And then lastly, we just want to get the identity of whatever this is attached to, which is the rotation position. So if I save this now, it'll probably make our bullet appear, but we need to have an actual script that's going to add physics to it, like a bullet script. So let's save this, and let's go back to Unity and see this fire off. right, so here we are back in Unity. Let me hide my level, so we're kind of doing this in sequence. All right, let me press play. I click start. I can actually move my tank now, and if I left click, it takes a little bit of time. Like, see how long it takes for me to create a bullet? If I go to my player tank here, and I make the fire rate 0, you can see I could just create them willy-nilly. If I make this 1, it's gonna take, like, I'm like mashing my button down. It's taking a long time for it to make a bullet appear. So I feel like as an entry level, 0.5 is fine, and we could always upgrade it, update the stuff, or update the speed through gameplay. But maybe we'll return to this game. I'm not sure. All right, that's it for this tutorial. In the next one, we're going to actually script our bullet.